Hey, everybody. It is Sunday. It is, what month is it? April 13th. It's a little after 7 p.m. Mountain Time. Got a little time on my hands. Thought I would drop in and see how everybody's doing. So let me know how you're doing. I think this has been shared everywhere I normally share it. Let me just try one more spot. And then, yeah, we'll see how everybody's doing. All right. Oh, I got to share it to link to my Discord. Hi, Kent. Hope you're doing all right. Boop. 2 days in a yeah. I've been quite busy, and last night, yeah, my wife and kids were busy with a friend of my wife's was visiting, and so I was on my own. So I was like, yeah, well, I will just see how everybody's doing. Howdy, Paul Chan. Hey, Dan. Hope all is well. Thank you, Hand of Omega. Doing well so far. It's going to be next couple weeks are going to be very busy, and then I head off on a book signing tour, then come back for a couple more very busy weeks, and then head off for another week of a book tour. And June's going to be nuts. Dapper Dinosaur crossover when? I don't think I'm familiar with the Dapper Dinosaur. I have to look into that. Hi, Tommy. Good to have you back. I've been signing most of today. Well, I got 1,000 of these book plates, which I sign, and then I send them back to my publisher, and my publisher sends them out to folks. And my signature has been getting sloppier and sloppier as the day has progressed, as I've been trying to sign all of them. I've only got about 100 left to sign. What sources, if any, did Paul have? I think Paul was mainly going from just the oral traditions that were in circulation and his own experiences, and talking with some of the folks who were around. He probably knew Peter, perhaps knew James to some degree. So yeah, I think it was mainly word of mouth, stuff like that. Have you studied Manichaeism, and what are some brief thoughts on it? I have not really studied Manichaeism, so I don't really have any real thoughts on it. Oh, Dapper Dinosaur debunks young Earth creationists and is your number one fan. I've run into a lot of people who debunk young Earth creationists, but let me see if I recognize this individual's channel. I don't think I recognize that channel, but I'll have to look into it. See if there's anything we can do. How and why do humans make certain numbers important, like 3, 7, 12? That's kind of a more of a psychological question. But I think, yeah, numbers like 2 and 3 become important in a lot of different societies through time and space. 7 and 12 are a little more unique to, well, 7 at least is a little more unique to I think Abrahamic religions. 12 is 3 times 4, so those are two significant numbers. But within the biblical tradition, at least, 12 tribes of Israel, all that kind of stuff. You recommended Ritual Animal to me on a recent stream, and I'm loving it. Thanks for all you do, Dan. Thank you, Caleb, for letting me know. I appreciate the heads up. Yeah, it can be dense, but it is a fascinating book. I think more people ought to read it. What's a good translation / collection of the Gnostic Gospels? Well, if you want just Gnostic literature in general, Robinson's translation of the Nag Hammadi library is considered pretty pretty reliable, and it's fairly up to date. But if you're looking for just gospel text, which is a specific genre, Bart Ehrman and with a colleague named Zlatko Plesky, I think is the colleague's name. They've translated a variety of different texts in a publication called The Other Gospels. And so I would recommend that if you're looking for just gospel text, because that has Gnostic and other gospels. Mainly Gnostic, though. Happy Passover, Pesach. Yes. Chag Sameach for those celebrating. Excuse me. Hello, Dan. Do you have a book list on biblical economics and relation to money? There are a couple of books that I think are fairly decent in that regard. Except they're both from 1995. Well, one of them I think is more directly relevant than the other. Morris Silver is the scholar. Economic Structures of Antiquity is the book, and it goes through and talks about a lot of different aspects of the economy and in the ancient world, and particularly the ancient Near East. And then he's got another book that I think he helped edit. Yes, he helped edit Social Justice in the Ancient World, which also talks quite a bit about the economy. Are you still coming to Arizona sometime in the near future? Yes, I will be in Clarkdale, Arizona on May 30th. I will be at Stardust Books for an event that will start at 6 p.m. So Clarkdale is just down the hill from Jerome. It's actually a family of mine that runs Stardust, and I've had a lot of family that has lived in Jerome for many years. And so, yeah, we swing by Sedona, Cottonwood, Clarkdale, Jerome fairly regularly. Hello, Dan. I have a question. What would, hypothetically speaking, prove Jesus' claim to be God? Jesus saying, I am God. Like, we have the angel of Adonai saying that in Exodus 3:6. So, like, that's not outside the realm of possibility. But I think the angel is actually not God. And so I don't think the representation of this separate entity as God makes much sense. It makes far more sense if the separate agent is an agent of God, is a representative of God in some way, shape, or form, whether in the sense of an image of God, which humans were understood to be in certain parts of ancient Southwest Asia, or some other kind of avatar / hypostasis, whatever, of God. There are a variety of different ways that was understood to work, but none of them identified the entity as the deity in a Trinitarian sense. That's a much later philosophical development. Why was Adonai decreasingly depicted as anthropomorphic as Judaism became increasingly monotheistic? I think what happens within Israelite and Judahite, and then later Judean tradition, is the God is exalted over the surrounding gods more and more. There's this competition and one-upmanship. And in order to constantly be one-upping the other deities, Adonai has to be further and further exalted and pushed further and further away. And then you get this sense that, you can't see God face to face, even though Moses spoke with God face to face. Then in Exodus 33, you have the idea you can't see God's face and live, but we have a bunch of exceptions to that rule. And then later on, you get the idea that God is hidden. You can't see God. And then even later on, you have the influx of Greek philosophical frameworks, and the notion of immateriality becomes salient within Greco-Roman period Judaism and early Christianity. And so deity, true deity in a philosophical sense, couldn't be corporeal, couldn't be anthropomorphic, because that would tie it to these fleshly kind of baser frameworks and substances, and that would not be appropriate for God. And so if Christians wanted to represent their deity in a way that had any relevance to broader Greco-Roman intelligentsia, they had to present their deity as satisfying the demands of their philosophical frameworks. And so God went from being hidden to just being immaterial and invisible and incorporeal and all of that kind of stuff. And that is like 3rd and 4th century is when that really becomes the rule. And even Origen of Alexandria, in his text on first principles, like what he was setting out to do was to demonstrate that God does not have a body. And he says that even, the Jewish folks and even Christians think of God as corporeal and having a body of spirit and all this kind of stuff. But then Origen says, but the philosophers despise it. And this is one of the reasons that he sets out to prove that God can't have a body, because he wants the Christian gospel to be palatable to the Greco-Roman philosophical sensitivities. Did the high priest really have the authority to give Paul letters of execution? I thought they couldn't do that to Christ himself. I think they had a couple of exceptions, but yeah, for the most part, they wouldn't really have had the authority within the Roman Empire to do that. So yeah, whether or not, and a lot of people say, well, Paul was the one carrying out these executions, but I don't think the data indicate that Paul was actually himself killing people. I think the idea is that he was arresting them and he was having them executed, if that is at all historically accurate, which it may not be. Are spirit and air interchangeable in Hebrew as in Greek? They can be. If you think of air as wind, then yeah, the word for spirit is the same as the word for wind. Is there any index that shows us when to take parts of the Bible literally and when to take metaphorically? Seems apologists just make up their own as needed. Yeah, no, there's not really an index, just because sometimes it is a little of both, and the difference between literal and metaphorical is a spectrum, and there's a case to make, and a lot of cognitive linguists, would point out that technically all language is metaphorical, but yeah, the folks who talk about reading it literally and when to read it literally and metaphorically, the governing principle is whatever serves their interests, their dogmas, their ideologies. And so yeah, it is pretty arbitrary when to take it literally and when not. This is more a geography question, but I always imagine the ancient Near East as vast wasteland / wilderness, sparsely populated by heavily fortified cities. This is probably inaccurate, right? Yeah, right? Yes, that would be pretty inaccurate. There were parts of it that were vast wasteland / wilderness, but it wasn't heavily fortified cities that you would normally run across. It was normally small hamlets and nomadic encampments and things like that. And then cities of different sizes, and the larger ones, most of them would have had walls of some kind, but the larger ones would have been the heavily fortified ones. And like in Judah, the main one really was Jerusalem. In the northern hill country, there were more of them. There was Shechem, and there was Megiddo, and there were other cities. The northern kingdom of Israel was larger and more successful in a lot of different ways than the southern kingdom of Judah. Didn't he execute Stephen? I assume you're talking about Paul. I think what the text says is that he guarded the cloaks or something of the folks who executed Stephen. Have you heard of the book, The Key to the Keystone, How Apocryphal Texts Unlock the Book of Mormon's Brass Plates? In what way could the Apocrypha play a role in the Book of Mormon? I have heard of it. I have been asked about it in the past, and I don't think it is going to make a very good case. But Well, I guess you would have to read the book to find out how that author thinks apocryphal texts are going to unlock things. But the Apocrypha was something to which Joseph Smith had access. The Apocrypha was influential in a variety of different ways in early Christianity and in Protestantism in the 17th and into the 17th, 18th, into the 19th centuries. But I don't know that there's a ton that the Apocrypha can do to really cast light on the Book of Mormon. But there are traditions certainly that come from both apocryphal and pseudepigraphical literature that a lot of scholars have suggested resonate with parts of the Book of Mormon, and particularly with parts of the Book of Moses, the Book of Abraham. But yeah, I don't think that book's going to make a ton of great arguments, but I have not read it myself. To what extent is the idea of Josiah pushing a campaign of cult centralization subscribed to among experts? Are there strong alternative hypotheses to explain the religious consolidation? So mainly the disagreement is about the degree to which this cult centralization was actually implemented versus just kind of a textual propagandistic thing that took place within the book of Deuteronomy and the Deuteronomistic literature. There are some folks who think that Josiah didn't really implement much of a cult reform at all, and just, the text just wrote about it as if it happened. There are other folks who think there was some kind of cult reform, but in the texts he went, there was a lot more exaggeration regarding what he accomplished within on the ground. But yeah, that's really where the main point of disagreement is. Didymus, thank you so much for the question. Aren't there verses that imply that humans are animals or beasts? What's springing to mind is the animal apocalypse of First Enoch, where which is like chapters 86 and around there, where there's kind of a history of humanity where it starts with the fallen angels as stars that fall from heaven and turn into like cows, I think cows or bulls or something like that, and then they mate, and then there are other animals that are produced in other animals, and there's speciation, and then you get down to the 12 tribes of Israel, and I think they're all the same kind of animal, and so you get different animal species that are representative of the different people of the earth, the different ethnic groups of the earth, and a little bit of the history, and so it's called the animal apocalypse. That's something that talks about humans as beasts. There are a smattering of passages where you have humans referred to as animals, metaphorically speaking, as just kind of poetic turns of phrase, but I don't remember off the top of my head where those are, if you're asking about the Bible specifically. You mentioned in your Mormon Stories interview that you don't like Mormon apologetics. What do you think of the various apologetic arguments for a historic Book of Mormon? Example, Nahum. I don't think they do an awful good job. The Nahum thing has better explanations, and it's not quite the bullseye that a lot of people make it out to be when you consider how many assumptions and how much blurring of the lines we have to do to get it to fit. So, yeah, there's a reason I don't like them, is because I don't think they do a very good job for the most part. Had a question, but got hungry while typing and ate it. Still going to support your work, though. Well, thank you, Federal Agent. I appreciate that very much. What your view to the Gnostic Gospels that they develop in the 2nd century CE traditions, secondary traditions that are recasting the story of Jesus and its relevance or relationship to earlier Judaism in light of Middle Platonic cosmology and morality and anthropology and stuff like that. They certainly don't have much value from a historical critical point of view. What is the real name of Sea of Galilee, and why do we call it this? Does it really have storms over it? Kinneret is the local name for the Sea of Galilee. Does it really have storms over it? Yeah, storms pass over it. It is fairly big. I mean, the Dead Sea's bigger, but it is a pretty big lake. So, yeah, it can influence weather patterns and things like that. Victory in Christ, thank you so much for the question. Isn't Babylon in Revelation Jerusalem? Chapter 18, verse 24. No, Babylon, I think is supposed to be. Sorry, I closed down my computer earlier today, and so my normal programs are not up and at them. So I've got to open up my accordance. Specifically, Revelation 18:24. And in you was found the blood of prophets and saints and all who have been slaughtered on the earth. Yeah, talking about your merchants were the magnates of the earth, and all nations were deceived by your sorcery. And in you was found the blood of prophets and of saints and of all who have been slaughtered on earth. Yeah, that sounds a lot more like Rome than it does Jerusalem. Because Jerusalem never achieved that kind of power, particularly international power. Animal Apocalypse is wild. It's like Animal Farm thousands of years earlier. It is definitely wild. So the gospel writers retconned Jesus' life to fulfill prophecies, just like writers and filmmakers retcon movies and comic books today. Yes. Eli, thank you so much for the question. Question about consensus. Do older/early scholarly works exist that are still considered to be part of the consensus, or is the consensus of the broad historicity of the Bible a bit of a moving target? It's a little of both. You certainly have older scholarship that is considered so foundational that it continues to influence scholars for generations down the road. So, for instance, the documentary hypothesis, while it's being tweaked and nuanced and revised at the edges and all that kind of stuff, and it's constantly being interrogated and refined. That's very, very old scholarship, but the core of it is still considered to be sound and is still considered to guide the consensus today. But yeah, there are certainly new archaeological discoveries that nudge scholars in one direction or another regarding the historicity of this, that, or the other. But there have not been many things that have been discovered in the last 100 years or so where scholars are suddenly like, we've long thought this was entirely ahistorical, and now this completely changes everything, and now we know this is all historical. Most of the changes that are going to take place in regards to historicity are going to be the fuzzy edges and not, the foundations of much. But thank you for the question. Oh, but where does Galilee come from? I used to know this because Galil means circle. Galal can mean to roll. So circle or district. And what do we have? Galileo HaGoim. So which verse of the Gentiles who settle here? Okay, so Isaiah 8:23. Yeah, you have Galil HaGoim at the end of Isaiah 8:23, which would be district of the nations, because I think there were a lot of non-Jewish folks who were settling there. So the Gentile district, and so Galil, meaning district, came to be the name of the area. Galilee. Galilah is district. That's used in Ezekiel 47:8, Joshua 13:4, Joel 4:4, Joshua 22:10. Yeah, so it sounds like it comes from a name for a word for district. My eyes, the goggles, they do nothing. Classic Simpsons scene. How unusual/normal would it have been for a man with the societal status of Christ to have been unmarried and without children? We can't really say for sure, but if he had formal education to be a Torah scholar, then particularly if he went in the rabbinic direction, it would have been pretty unusual for him to have been unmarried without children by 30 years of age. But it's not really clear that he did have all that formal education. At least I don't think it's that clear. But if he was not formally educated, then I don't know that it would have been significantly unusual. But yeah, I don't know for sure. What does image and likeness mean in Genesis 1:26 and 27? It refers mainly to outward appearance, but it can also can refer to a few different things, because in this time period when this was written in Mesopotamia, the royalty was thought of as the image of God. And so there's a royal status that is also kind of associated with it. And also the image of a deity was a representative of the deity. And so I think the idea that there is some kind of physical appearance similarity going on, that humanity, their appearance is patterned after the appearance of the gods because the gods were anthropomorphic in ancient West Asia. I think that's part of it. That's kind of the surface level. But then also there's the royal aspect of it. There's the idea that the image is the representative of God, bears God's authority. And that's why the rest of the passage goes on to say they will have dominion over the fish of the sea and the birds of the skies and all that kind of stuff. So I think it's there are a few different concepts that are converging with the idea of image and likeness. And Randall Garr wrote a really good, very thorough discussion of this. I think called In His Own Image and Likeness. Let me just verify. Yes, In His Own Image and Likeness from 2003. He's got a wonderful book about that. Skibidi Bap, thank you so much for the question. What do you think about the Quran's statement / perspective about Jesus? I think it's mainly adopting traditions that were in circulation in the 6th century CE. There's a way that the docetism of a kind of Gnostic take on Jesus not actually being crucified, someone else being crucified in his place or something like that, that makes its way into the Quran. So I think it is drawing from sources that were in circulation, more directly from non-Orthodox Christian and maybe even some Jewish sources. So it's drawing from what was available. Where does Rome kill the OT prophets? The Jews killed Zechariah. I don't know that Rome killed the OT prophets, but Rome is equated with Babylon, and Babylon certainly is responsible for doing an awful lot of damage. But Rome, by the end of the 1st century CE, when Revelation was being written, Rome was the main enemy and had killed an awful lot of Christians, including some they probably understood to be apostles and maybe even prophets. But it's apocalyptic imagery, so it's more about vibes than it is about actually laying out literally what they're talking about. And so blurring the boundaries between Babylon, Rome, and whatever enemies is certainly a part of it. But if the idea is to try to interpret Revelation as being Judeophobic, I think you'd have to make a stronger case than that. And however, there is a wonderful book, a new book called Judeophobia and the New Testament, Texts and Context, and it talks about Judeophobia in the New Testament, and then goes through every single book of the New Testament, a different chapter, and has a discussion about it. And there's a muscular chapter on Judeophobia and Revelation, and then it also covers the Epistle of Barnabas, the Martyrdom of Polycarp, the Gospel of Peter, and the Proto-Evangelium of James. So there's a lot of good discussion in here. So would highly recommend, if you're interested in these discussions from people who know this topic better than me, I would check out that new book. Curtis, thank you for the question. Hi, Dan. I have a question on Mark 12, 15 through 17. A teacher told me that it was a sin for Jews to possess a denarius where this incident occurred. Is that accurate? Something about Caesar is God? I don't think so. I think there are a lot of ways that a lot of things that people make up to try to make a better sense of what's going on in the text. But no, I'm not aware of any notion that they weren't allowed to handle money. Favorite chapter in any Bible book? I really like Deuteronomy 32. Yeah, if I got to limit it to a specific chapter, I would say that's probably one of my favorite. Victory in Christ, thank you so much for the question. Luke 13, 33 through 34 says it's impossible for a prophet to die outside of Jerusalem. Matthew 23, 37, blah, blah, blah. Well, one, just because Luke says it doesn't mean that the book of Revelation cares or is going to honor that idea. That's presupposing univocality. But what do we have here? Yesterday, today, tomorrow, and the next day, I must be on my way because it is impossible for a prophet to be killed outside of Jerusalem. So this is what Jesus insists they go tell that fox for him. I'm casting out demons and performing cures today and tomorrow, and on the third day I finish my work. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to it. How often have I desired to gather your children together as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, and you were not willing. Yeah, I don't think that's an interpretive key that helps us, to which all other texts in the Bible are subordinated. I think that's a bit of rhetoric that the author of the Gospel of Luke is using, and the Gospel of Luke was probably, I happen to think that it was the last gospel written, so it really doesn't have, and was written after Revelation as well. But give me just 1 second to see if I can find a commentary on that, because I imagine most scholars would say something very similar. Uh, 33. In verse 33, Luke, so this is from the Hermeneia, volume 2 of the Hermeneia commentary series on Luke. In verse 33, Luke has Jesus say that he will end it in Jerusalem, but before arriving at that point, there was a whole life, a whole ministry described by the verb to walk, to be on one's way. To-do-to-do. Yeah, there's nothing surprising in that commentary, but that's not, yeah. When it comes to Revelation, I don't see why Luke would be an interpretive lens for understanding Revelation. But thank you for the question. Devin, thanks so much for the question. I'm doing some work on the history of Eucharist theology. Is there any linguistic case for or against real presence? I would need to know what you mean, because the whole real presence thing, that's a theological claim. That's an ideology. That's not something that linguistics is going to support in any way. If you mean, is there any linguistic case for interpreting it as a reference to real presence, that would be a different story. Also, there seems to be controversy whether John 6 is Eucharistic. Why is that? I don't know why. Oh, the feeding of the 5,000. I think that's probably just something that people want to read through a Eucharistic lens. I don't know that there's any case to make that this was foreshadowing the Eucharist or anything like that. But yeah, linguistic case for or against real presence. I think almost certainly, at least within the New Testament, the idea was that this was symbolic, that this was not some kind. The idea of transubstantiation is a post-biblical innovation. I don't know that there's a linguistic case to make that we should understand the implementation of the Eucharist in the New Testament to actually demand or require the notion of real presence. So if that's the question, no, I don't think there's a case to make for that. Victory in Christ, thank you for another question. But John was in that conversation. Well, no, the author of Luke has John in that conversation, and the John of Revelation was not the John of the Gospels. They're like, even the earliest Christians were like, yeah, that definitely was not the beloved disciple. So yeah, that we're presupposing univocality. We're also presupposing historicity. We're also presupposing the post-biblical ideology that developed regarding the author of Revelation as the author of the Gospel of John, which is something that I think starts with Justin Martyr and is not accepted by many early Christians and is certainly rejected by the overwhelming majority of biblical scholars today, because as early Christians pointed out, the Greek of Revelation is far inferior to the Greek of the Gospel of John, and there's just no reason to think they're the same John. But thank you for the comment. Silver, thank you so much for the question. Why do conspiracy theories always go back to Jewish folk and not to Egyptians or Persians or those dastardly Akkadians? Because conspiracy theories oftentimes build on anti-Semitism, and because anti-Semitism comes cheap in the world of conspiracy theories, and anti-Semitism is the beating heart of most conspiracy theories these days, whether it's the Rockefellers or whether it's whatever having to do with Jesus, or whether it's all the stuff that Jewish folks have been accused of and killed for centuries and centuries. And even now we have idiotic conspiracy theories about the Holocaust, and people think that they're defending anti-Semitism by denying the Holocaust, but also criminalizing folks who defend the humanity of Palestinians, and think that it's not okay to murder children. Yeah, so it's cheap. Conspiracy theories, build on an anti-Semitic foundation. So who's the vineyard parable about? Matthew 21. I don't think this has any relevance to whatever is going on in Revelation. The author of Revelation was probably not reading these Gospels. And Matthew and Revelation were probably written too close to each other anyway. But Matthew 21. But certainly the Gospels are trying to distinguish those folks among the Jewish community that are rejecting Jesus and are not doing what the followers of Jesus think is the natural next step of Judaism. So yeah, it's one thing for the Gospels to say, hey, the Jewish folks are doing it wrong. It's quite another for that to mean that the book of Revelation is condemning Jerusalem as Babylon. Parable of the wicked tenants. The wedding. Well, we're already into chapter 22. Yeah, so I don't think this. I don't think appealing to any of the Gospels or any other text outside of the book of Revelation works to try to shackle Revelation to a specific reading of who Babylon is. I think you have to look in the book of Revelation to find out who the author of Revelation thinks Babylon is. I heard a claim today that there is no archaeological evidence that disproves Scripture. Thoughts? Scripture makes thousands of different claims, and so you have to go on a case-by-case basis. It's not like Scripture is a monolith, and everything either unilaterally supports it or unilaterally disproves it. There are many things in the Bible that are precluded by archaeological data. So yeah, I would say that's not only just methodologically a weird claim, but yeah, definitely a false claim. What's the t-shirt for today? This design is called Get Low by Maimonides Nuts. And this is the Hebrew word for truth, although the aleph at the beginning is kind of rubbed out. And so if you delete the aleph, you have a mem and a tav, mate, which means dead. And so this is a reference to the tradition of the golem, which was an anthropomorphic creation that could be enlivened by inscribing certain words, like the Tetragrammaton on it, or in the case of Rabbi Lowe, which was a medieval rabbi, the emet was written on the golem, and then if you rubbed out the aleph, then the word became dead, and then that deactivated the golem. And in the story of the golem of Prague, which is the story associated with Rabbi Lowe, it needed to be deactivated because it was causing trouble. So that's the story of this shirt. Didymus, thank you for another question. Did Christianity create capital A, anti-Semitism, the idea that the Jews are a nefarious force in the world, not just simple bigotry? I think that was one of the main contributors to it, yes. In the medieval period, Jewish folks were marginalized by Christians and then demonized. So an example would be usury. The Hebrew Bible prohibits usury within the Jewish community, but it allows it between Jewish folks and non-Jewish folks. Christianity kind of doubled down on no usury at all. And so for over 1,000 years within Christianity, all usury was considered everywhere from unseemly to a mortal sin. And so in the medieval period, there were an awful lot of people who wanted loans, and they were hard to come by because you couldn't charge interest. And so Jewish folks who were not allowed to participate in most of the economic activity, because they could loan stuff to Christians, they became compelled really by Christian power asymmetries to be in the business of lending money. And then they developed a reputation as money lenders. And then that reputation became demonized because people who owed money hate the people who are lending them money. And so they force Jewish people into certain businesses, and then they demonize them for being characterized or being prototypically involved in those businesses into which the Christians force them. And so that's just one example of how Christians demonize Jewish folks, and there are numerous others. And I remember I went on an all-day tour of Oxford's Jewish Quarter when I was there for my master's program, and learned an awful lot about the ways that Jewish folks were oppressed and were persecuted living in Oxford, including all of the blood libel and money cutting stuff. All those accusations that were made up by Christian people who were just looking for scapegoats. So I think Christianity is, or at least certain manifestations of Christianity, are absolutely responsible for the majority of the anti-Semitism that is in circulation today. Deconstruction Zone just gave you a shout out, Dan. Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate you letting me know. Are they live right now, or is this a video that was just published? By the way, there was a live stream a while ago where somebody said, hey, did you listen to 96.3, which is a radio station here in Utah? They were like, there was an interview with Post Malone, and he shouted you out. And I did not see who said that, but I could not find any information on this on that radio station's website. But if anybody knows what was going on there, I would really like to know how that happened. Simone, welcome. Hellenic Egypt also produced some pretty horrible anti-Jewish tracts, which had some tropes that then became Roman anti-Christian canards and then became anti-Jewish again when Rome became Christianized. Peter Schaeffer's Judeophobia, attitudes toward the Jews in the ancient world, is a very good write-up of the origins of a lot of this stuff. Thank you for chiming in. I knew that a lot of it went back before Christianity, but it seemed to me that it would have kind of faded away had Christianity not taken over the Roman Empire. But that's wonderful background. So Judeophobia, attitudes toward the Jews. And Peter Schaeffer is a wonderful scholar. Let me see if I can just pull that. Do I have this book? I might have this book. Druidia. Okay. No, it doesn't look like I have this book. From 1998, so it's getting up there. But yeah, check that one out. Mr. Hyde, thank you for the question. I notice you're quite a Marvel fan. Do you think you'll ever do a video on Jesus and God as depicted in Marvel comics for fun? I don't know if I'll ever do a video about that. I'm a fan of a lot of different comics, and Marvel just, I think, happens to do the best at branding and merchandising and promotion. So I think there's certainly some interesting things going on there, but I haven't had the time for that kind of recreational research. But that would certainly be interesting to look into. Red and Blue, thank you so much for the question. Is there any manuscript evidence that John 21 was not part of the original gospel? Manuscript evidence? No. I think as far back as we have the end of John, we have chapter 21 in there. However, we do have the fact that the very end of John 21, it says, this is the disciple who is testifying to these things and has written them, and we know that his testimony is true. So who's we? And where does the we end and the testimony of the disciple begin? That's not an easy question to answer. Some people might argue that all of chapter 21 is a secondary edition. But as far as I know, no, there's no manuscript evidence for the absence of chapter 21 from the Gospel of John. Ego e me Apologetics, thank you so much for a question. Hey, Dan, can you explain the linguistic difference between the word wehazik and Deuteronomy 22:25? Transliteration always throws me off. So, Vehechazik ba, yeah, and so what you're talking about 28, yeah, with the verbal root tafas. Any credence to the idea that Deuteronomy 22:28 is referring to a consensual relationship and not SA? No, that's a ridiculous argument. And I'm not saying you're doing that argument, but I have never seen anybody try to do that in a competent way, because the verbal root chazak means the exact same thing as the verbal root tafas. Now, people will say, no, it can mean handle. It doesn't necessarily have to mean grab against someone's will. And that is true. However, what people are ignoring is that it only means handle, or it only can mean handle, if the object is an inanimate object. If it's an instrument, a tool, or something like that. Every single time tafas is used with a human as the object, it is about seizing someone against their will so they can't get away. So and the argument that I have seen is always that, oh, chazak and lie with, that's like the term of art for sexual assault, and tafas is not that, therefore they're not referring to sexual assault, and that's pure and utter nonsense. That's not a term of art in any way, shape, or form whatsoever. These are two synonyms for grabbing somebody and then lying with them. And so, yeah, there's not a case to make that Deuteronomy 22:28 is about a consensual relationship. And in fact, I discuss that in my forthcoming book, The Bible Says So, chapter 8. Let me see where where I talk about these verses. And when you look in the scholarship, you can look in the JPS Torah commentary, you can look in any critical commentary, and they all refer to these couple of passages, 22, 28, and 29, as the rape of a virgin. And people will try to draw a parallel with Exodus 22, verses 16 and 17, which do seem to be about seduction, not necessarily sexual assault, but the notion that should therefore govern our reading of Deuteronomy 22 is not supported by anything. I know I talked about verse 28. Okay, so I've got a few paragraphs on this. If you look up tafas in a biblical Hebrew lexicon, the basic sense it provides might be something generic like lay hold of, but if you look any closer at the use of the verb, you'll see that it only means to hold or handle in a nonviolent sense when the direct object of the verb is an inanimate object. When the direct object of the verb is a person, it always refers to force. In 1 Samuel 23:26, David is running away while Saul and his men are closing in on David to tafas him. In 1 Kings 18:40, Elijah wins the contest with the prophets of Baal and then commands his officers to tafas the prophets of Baal. Don't let a single one escape. He then proceeds to kill them. After Jeremiah has preached God's word in Jeremiah 26:8, the priests and the prophets tafas him and say, "You're going to die." The verb is never used with a human as a direct object where it does not refer to physical restraint against someone's will. You simply cannot argue based on the verb tafas that this passage does not refer to sexual assault. And then I go into other details about, it says they are found. Therefore, the two of them were, it was consensual. And yeah, that's has problems of its own. So I would say, no, there's not an argument to make there. Silver, thank you so much for the question. I looked up Semite, and the strict definition would include Palestinians. Wouldn't that make talking about Gaza and anti-Semitism a big mess? No, because that's the dictionary fallacy and an etymological fallacy, because anti-Semitism is not just any prejudice or hate of a person who could be categorized as a Semite. Anti-Semitism has always been a reference specifically to prejudice and systemic oppression and underprivileging of Jewish people specifically. So there's a long history of how these words have been used, and yeah, that would not be an accurate case to make. So yeah, unless they were Jewish, but you don't have an awful lot of Jewish Palestinian folks. You used to. You had like Golda Meir, in fact, I think said she identified herself as a Palestinian Jewish person, but these days I think that's vanishingly rare. But I'm happy to be corrected about that if people know better than I. Alan, thanks so much for the question. What is the scholarly consensus regarding Gog, Magog, and Ezekiel 38 and 39? That they're a location and a ruler of that location, probably somewhere in north of Syria into Anatolia in that region. It has nothing to do with Turkey, with Russia, with China as nation states, if that's what you're talking about. And Simone says anti-Semitism was literally invented in the 19th century as a euphemism for Judenhass, or Jewish hate. So yeah, it's just and it's used inconsistently, because once you get into the New Testament, they seem to mistake the land and the ruler of the land for the names of two rulers, and it's not that in Ezekiel. Remember when Marvel was allowed to have actual Satan as a villain in Ghost Rider? Yeah, they've kind of moved away from that quite a bit. I was sent a every now and then people will send me comic books, old comic books in the mail, which like makes me giddy like a 12-year-old every time. But one of them recently was an old I think it was an old Ghost Rider thing. Yeah, it was. And I had never seen like really, really old Ghost Rider stuff. But who was he? I want to say he was, I don't remember who he was fighting. Sorry. Uh, Echoing Me Apologetics says, thanks, Stan. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Happy to help in any way I can. Ever read The Darkening Age by Catherine Nixie? No, I haven't. I think I am listening to, if I have the author right, I'm listening to Heretic right now. Yeah, that's the author. And it kind of does what a lot of non-specialists do in trade books. It leans into some kind of, I would say, squishy claims and builds an awful lot on some of these squishy claims. So Nixie's book is about a lot of the different takes on Christianity that were in circulation in the early centuries. But it's trying to make it sound like Jesus was just like there were a bunch of movements that were all the same, and Jesus is just one of them. But it kind of the author kind of gets a little what's a good word? Like they're firm on when things date to until they need something to feel like it's closer to the actual life of Jesus than would otherwise be rhetorically meaningful. And then they'll not talk about when something dates to, or they'll be a little squishier about when it dates to. So I think it falls into a trap that a lot of arguments along this line do. So, but I have not read anything else of Nixie's. So once I finish this, I might move on to another work of theirs. But yeah, it's like you can tell it's not a specialist in this field of study writing about this. Dan, tell us about Lego Dan. So Lego Dan is also holding something up. This is I had a friend of mine who goes by Captain Dadpool make a knife for another friend of mine who really likes knives. And in the process, he also made me a knife that was supposed to be reminiscent of Wolverine in both the coloration and also in the shape of the knife. So anyway, that's something that Lego Dan is holding up. So this is a Bible, and that goes in there. And this was made by a friend of mine who goes by Black Exmo, or used to go by Black Exmo on social media. I don't know what he's going by these days because I think his content has shifted a little bit. But he 3D printed me this and sent it to me. And it says, all right, let's see it. Got the Bible, got the cool beard and everything. So yeah, I just thought that was the funniest thing in the world. And so he has been the stand for my Wolverine knife for a while now. So and then I've also got an actual action figure that somebody made. A content creator who goes by Retro Gimmick. They make action figures of different content creators, and this was mine. And got the Data Over Dogma shirt. and then it actually speaks. Uh-oh, the battery may have died. Oh, there's a charging port. Okay. Yeah, I gotta charge it. Okay, it's charging. So yeah, I've been sent all kinds of cool stuff, and recently there's somebody else who works in 3D printing, who knows that I talk an awful lot about the Tanakh cult stand, which is one of the coolest artifacts in the world. So he sent me a 3D printed version, which you can see right here behind the YouTube thing. And then recently said, hey, I've got a couple more of these. Let me send them along. So I've got 2 more 3D printed Tanakh cult stands. Actually, 3 more, because he also sent me a mini one. I don't know if it's focusing. There we go. And so I'm giving these away. Doing a giveaway. Anybody who buys a ticket to one of the upcoming Data Over Dogma book tour events, and then sends in the screenshot of the purchase confirmation to contact@dataoverdogmapod.com will be entered into the drawing. And so I'll have a drawing for these 3 Tanakh cult stands, and then also for free merch at the events. So yeah, people send me cool stuff, which I really, really appreciate. And when I get more than one, I usually just give away the extras. Lucas, thank you so much for the question. Hi, Dan. I heard Pete Enns say that within Judaism, Israel's God was tied to glory, not shame. So Jesus' humiliating death on the cross had no real precedent in Jewish theology. What's your thoughts? I think that there is some truth to that, because I think that you don't have an idea of a suffering Messiah prior to Jesus. And I think what happened with Jesus is he was crucified, and then the movement went, well, crap. What are we going to do now? And then returned to the scriptures and came and renegotiated their understanding of the mission and identity of the Messiah to account for this. And so they read the crucifixion and the resurrection back into the Messiah tradition, and then they take up things like the lament in Psalm 22, or they take up the suffering servant of Isaiah 53, which, as near as I can tell, was always understood as representative of a personification of corporate Israel who had gone through the suffering. It was never about a Messiah. And so, yeah, the humiliating death, I think, was probably an actual historical event that they then had to find a way to rationalize, to incorporate into some renegotiated idea of the Messiah. And so that was probably an ideological and a theological innovation on the part of followers of Jesus. And so this is one of the reasons I think that case makes far better sense than any of the arguments I've heard that the resurrection is about a dying and rising God. No, it was about a bunch of terrified followers of Jesus who found a way to have their leader, their Messiah, who unfortunately got crucified, to continue to be relevant. I think that makes a lot better sense of things than somebody just cooking up this entire idea based on dying and rising God motifs, which is an outdated Frazerian concept that has been rejected by scholars for decades anyway. Simone says, I might as well ask a proper question. Do you have any good recommendations of the use of Goel, both in a property relations sense and in a soteriological sense? Also, perhaps in Deuteronomy 19:6 and 12, where it is tied to blood vengeance. Gosh, most of the studies I've seen on that have been primarily about Job. Yeah, there's Suriano's paper, which is about Job. I thought I would have had something. Let me search in Hebrew. Let's see if I have anything. No, I don't think I have anything there either. Give me just 1 second. And I think I've probably run across some stuff within Ruth, but not much beyond that. Ugh. Some apologetic stuff. Some 19th century stuff. Here's something in Korean. It's from 2017, The Institute of the Kinsman Redeemer, God's Plan for Economic Equality in Ruth 4. Uh, 1974 thing, the Leverett and Goel institutions in the Old Testament. Yeah, most of the stuff I'm seeing is Boaz as Goel in Ruth 4, liberation from economical exchange. That looks like an undergraduate paper. Yeah, I don't know much off the top of my head. Sorry, Simone. I don't think I can give you an incredibly good answer. The mostly about Job is the problem I'm trying to get over. Either that or old, very conventionally theological stuff on Deutero-Isaiah, which I think is wrong. Yeah, that's kind of what I figured. Because the other thing that sprang to mind was the so yeah, some Deutero-Isaiah stuff, but mainly I was thinking about the hermeneutic commentary on Deutero-Isaiah, which I know you're not a big fan of. Silver, thanks so much for the question. Thanks for tolerating my dumb questions. No such thing as dumb questions, really. But some of the folks I respond to on TikTok are pushing it. I feel embarrassed because I'm usually the one to point out the etymological fallacy to people. I'm still keeping an eye out for those sneaky Acadians, though. Yeah, no worries at all. You don't have to be embarrassed at all. Sorry, I'm getting texts and things from people that are a bit distracting. Hector, thank you so much for the question. Are you still coming to Seattle on the 28th? Yes, Weston, Seattle, 7 p.m. And for those of you who don't know, in order to promote my forthcoming book, The Bible Says So, What We Get Right and Wrong About Scripture's Most Controversial Issues, my podcast co-host Dan Beecher and I have crowdfunded, or are crowdfunding, better put, a book tour. So we're going to be stopping in Chicago on April 26th. We'll be in Seattle on April 28th. We'll be in Portland on April 30th, and then we'll be in LA on May 2nd. And then on May 17th, we're going to be in Dallas. On May 19th, we're going to be in Atlanta. On May 21st, we're going to be in Philly. And May 22nd, we're going to be in DC. And all the events start at 7 p.m. And you can look in Indiegogo for Data Over Dogma book launch tour for the two different events. Leg 1 is the West Coast one, and then leg 2 is the East Coast one. And yeah, I wanted to try to do this to have the tickets be as cheap as possible. But the people we got to organize it for us said, not if you want to pay for it. So we have had to, I think the general event, which includes Dan and me chatting for a while, a Q&A, and the book signing, I think the tickets for that are $52. And then there's a VIP event, which is limited to 25 people per location, which will follow after that. And that'll just be food and mingling. And those are, I think, oh gosh, I don't think they're 150, but they could be as much as 150. Again, I didn't set these prices. I'm not particularly happy with them. Yeah, they're 150. So, but yeah, I'll be in Seattle at the Westin Seattle on the 28th. Mike, thanks so much for the question. You think Jesus was extraordinarily charismatic, a generational talent, or just a fairly normal cult leader who got lucky in how influential he's been? I think he's definitely more charismatic than most. And I think his story accreted enough wisdom to it that he got very lucky with how his resurrection was developed and his tradition was renegotiated. So I think it was a right time, right place kind of situation, probably based on the data, as far as I can tell. Simone says, okay, I will have to do my own lexicographical work. Then good to know, and I'll look through non-biblical stuff as well. Someone's got to do the grunt work, I guess. Well, have you looked in TDOT? I know that's a little outdated, but certainly they'll have some kind of foundation you can start from. But let me think. There has to have been something in like the Journal of Northwest Semitic languages or something like that. But yeah, I haven't looked for that specifically. Jeffrey, thanks so much for the question. Growing up evangelical, I learned that male seed conveys original sin. Thus, the Immaculate Conception must refer to Jesus' birth. You said often that this just isn't so. Does this former idea have a historical basis? No, the Immaculate Conception refers to Mary's conception, because there was no male seed for Jesus's conception, so there was no need to bridge the gap. The Immaculate Conception is all about how two humans' sexual union produced an offspring without without the transference of original sin. So the Immaculate Conception is about how Mary's parents, when they came together in that sexual union, were temporarily exempt from the passing on of original sin. When Jesus was conceived, in whatever way you think the gospel authors imagined that happened, the idea was that it was God who was the parent, and so there was no original sin to be passed on. So yeah, that sounds like evangelical sour grapes to me, or at least some people not happy with what the Catholic doctrine is. Because regarding what the Catholic doctrine is, that's not really up for debate. It is and always has been about the conception of Mary. Red and Blue, thank you so much for the question. Does the story about Bar Majan, a supposed parallel to the story of Lazarus, actually appear in the Talmud, or is it just an urban legend? If you're talking about, are you talking about the Egyptian story? I think there is a case to make that there is a bit of a narrative parallel there. I don't know if it's picked up in the Talmud though. Looks like the Talmud. So Jacob Neusner has something about this in the Talmud of the Land of Israel, Volume 31, Sanhedrin and Makot, concerning an incident in Ashkelon regarding Bar Mayan, the village tax collector. So that I don't know if that is inspired by the Egyptian story. This is kind of fuzzy stuff in my memory, and I'd have to go back and look more closely at that to see what that's all about. Okay, I got about 11 more minutes before I've got to go do dishes. I look forward to Monday's new episodes of Data Over Dogma. Thank you, Daleks. I appreciate that. This, let's see, tomorrow's episode is called Usurer Error. And we talk about usury, and then we talk about the parable of the talents. So should be an interesting discussion. Hopefully it'll be an interesting discussion. What would be the accurate cosmological picture of ancient Israel? One God or many gods? Many gods, with the God of Israel being the daddy of them all. I talk about that as well in my forthcoming book, The Bible Says So, What We Get Right and Wrong About Scripture's Most Controversial Issues. I kind of get annoyed by trade books having to have some kind of explanatory, what's it called? Subtitle. I've got to turn in a proposal for my next trade book to the publisher, probably end of May, beginning of June, and I'm thinking of writing a book on how the God of the Bible changes from the earliest literary layers down to the latest literary layers, and I'm thinking of calling it God, a Life. But all that does when I think about that title is remind me of the Korn song, Got the Life. So that's how that's how the title always is sung in my head. Yeah, so that sorry, got distracted a little bit there. So that's chapter 13 in here. The Bible says there is only one God, and that chapter goes through and talks about how the Bible does not say that. Baron Arcanus says, who do you like better, Anakin Skywalker or Luke Skywalker? I mean, Luke Skywalker. Obviously, Anakin was always kind of a little brat. What a knife gesture. I was like, what does that mean? But then I thought maybe that's a pun. Is TDOT the old German one? The entry on Goel in there is kind of bad. Nidot is a bit better, but less comprehensive. I should probably check Sheffield, actually. By Sheffield, do you mean Klein's? I need to get the new Klein's because I have the old one. But not the new. The DCH. And I don't remember how I've entitled that PDF. There we go. Let's see if the old one has anything to say in there. Gimel. There's the Gimel Aleph. Gimel. Yeah, there we go. Goel. Away from instrument of. So we got Gaal, to redeem, pay redemption price for dispossessed relative or property of relative. Reclaim. It's got a pretty lengthy entry. Obviously, it's very abbreviated. I don't see that it has. It's got an entry for Goal, but I think it's just treating Goel as the participial form of the verbal root. Yeah. But yeah, it looks like it's got a few pages on there. Alan, thanks so much for the question. One last question. If I understand all the answers to my questions, Revelation, Daniel, and Ezekiel are not prophecy for our time? Definitely not. Revelation is intended to be a give hope to and exhort followers of Jesus to stay unspotted from the evil empire and to remain faithful to the community of Jesus followers toward the end of the 1st century CE. Daniel is mid-2nd century CE, give hope to and exhort Jewish folks to remain faithful to their community in light of the pressure from Antiochus IV Epiphanes. Ezekiel is exilic, early post-exilic Jewish people talking about how God is looking out for them and there will be restoration in the future. Yeah, none of it is a prophecy for our time. At least that's the data certainly don't support any of that. It would just be dogma that led to that conclusion. Paul, thank you so much for the super chat. Mike, thank you for another question. I think you said the NT's moral teachings have contemporary-ish precedent instead of being epic-shattering / out of nowhere detail / further reading. I mean, when you look at any critical commentary on New Testament texts, and again, the 4 that I recommend, Hermeneia, Anchor Yale Bible, New Testament Library / Old Testament Library, and the International Critical Commentary, you look at any of those, they're going to start by saying, let's situate this within its environment of composition and initial circulation. And that's the foundation. And then they'll talk about how it has been renegotiated after that. But yeah, what they represent kind of incremental elaborations on pre-existing things. That's how your literature gains traction and purchase in whatever environment you're sending it out into, is by being an incremental elaboration on things that people already understand and things that people are already talking about. Because you just can't come out of left field with something nobody has ever heard before that has no relationship to the things they care about and they're talking about and expect it to land. It's just going to go and just slide right off the field. So yeah, you got to have it's got to be building on something that's already there. So yeah, epic shattering out of nowhere. Yeah, that doesn't make much sense for literature. So my wife is updating my calendar, and I just glanced at big bag of dirt delivery. So we're going to have a big yellow bag of dirt put on our driveway, but I read dirt too quickly, so it said big bag of something else delivery. But thank you for the question, Mike. Inshallah, is Jesus just the Zoroastrian Saoshyant reworked? No. I think Zoroastrianism probably influenced Greco-Roman period Judaism to some degree, and then Christianity is building on, incrementally elaborating on Greco-Roman period Jewish ideologies. So some of the dualism and things like that is probably rooted in Zoroastrian influence. But no, I don't think that the Jesus tradition is just aping a Zoroastrian tradition. I don't think the primary developers of that tradition were that well aware of what was going on within Zoroastrianism. Certainly, I think there are points of contact after the Jesus tradition develops where there's potential for some influence, but I wouldn't know the details of that kind of influence. Couple more minutes. Daniel, thank you so much for the question. Is 1 Corinthians 10:4 and the moving rock an example of Paul finding Jesus outside the written text and in tradition? Implications for Paul overall. 1 Corinthians 10:4. And all drank the same spiritual drink, for they drank from the spiritual rock that followed them, and the rock was Christ. I mean, that's about Moses and that's Moses. So that's a part of the textual tradition. And of course, the way they talked about it was certainly something that was supra-textual, was stuff that was going on in the discourse rather than in the text themselves. But that's how most people talk about these kinds of things. So, it's like how people today will talk about the Prince of Egypt, and they think they're talking about the book of Exodus. The moving rock. I mean, and it's... Oh, that followed them. Well, no, because that's in the text as well. Deuteronomy 32, for instance, the Song of Moses talks about God as the rock. And so it's kind of melding the idea of them getting water from the rock and also God being their rock, and God was following along with them. So that's still negotiating with the textual tradition rather than stuff going on outside of it. But Paul was undoubtedly engaging with a lot of extra supratextual traditions, the way the stories were being circulated in that time. And, that's what we've got going on with Jude and other texts, how First Enoch is finds its way into that, and I think like something like Luke 10:18, where Jesus says, I saw, and there is a midrash of the moving rock. Okay. My friend David texted me. I guess he's in the, I guess you're in, on, I didn't catch you in the chat, but hi, David. So yeah, I guess it is something that's a tradition that was in circulation at the time, that would be later textualized in the midrash. I have you on my TV, haha. Oh, that's making me self-conscious. So yeah, there's a lot that's going on that we don't have a way to tap into. We don't have a way to spy on how a lot of these traditions were being discussed. And like the Son of Man tradition, a lot of scholars, we really wish we knew exactly what the Son of Man tradition was doing toward the mid to the end of the 1st century CE. You're the background for my dishwashing, which reminds me, I'm now one minute late to go start dishwashing myself. So implications for Paul overall. I think Paul is trying to stick pretty close to the text, but is also looking at the text through some of the philosophical-ish traditions that were going on. My friend David would know an awful lot more about that than I would. But certainly Paul is engaging with the discourse of that day, and whether that results in particular readings or traditions from beyond the text and the tradition, or if he's just, that just allows him to draw from the way the texts are engaged in the existing tradition. I don't know, because a lot of people would compare a lot of what Paul's doing to Philo or something like that, other folks who are engaging in the text and the tradition. So yeah, Paul is not my wheelhouse, but and Paul can get phenomenally complex phenomenally quickly, which is one of the reasons that I generally stay away from Paul. So one of these days, David, since you have me on in the background while you're washing the dishes, and hopefully it's very weird for you to have your TV on and have someone directly talking to you from your TV while you're washing the dishes. I hope it's weird. But I'll have to have you on a live stream at some point. So I can take the Hebrew Bible and the and Christology questions and stuff like that. And whenever somebody wants to talk about Paul, you can talk about Paul. Yeah, let's do it. All right, awesome. I'll text you and we'll figure out an opportunity for that. Okay, last question before I've got to go do the dishes so my wife doesn't smother me in my sleep. Thank you, Noah, for the question. Third time Jesus asked Peter if he loves him, he switches from agape to phileo. English renders both as love. Maybe I'm overanalyzing, but what's the reason for the change in a verse built on repetition? Yeah, that's most scholars would say it's over-interpreting it to make a big deal out of this because Jesus switches as well. Let me pull it up. There we go. Okay. Starts in verse 15. Jesus says, agapasme, and Peter responds, philose. And then Jesus asks again, agapasme, and Peter responds, philose. And then Jesus says, philisme. So Jesus changes to phileo, and then Peter responds, philose. So these are really not completely isometric synonyms, but there's quite a bit of overlap. Some scholars would say if we're reading into this at all, maybe Jesus is like, fine, I'll meet you where you are. Do you phileo me? And Peter just uses the same verb. And I've heard people in Spanish. It's kind of the same thing. Somebody might say, "Me amas?" and the other person would say, "Te quiero," and that's not the same thing. But yeah, I think here they're probably closer to synonymous than amar and querer. And Simone says, I was about to mention that. And that's probably about something from a few minutes ago. All right. Thank you, everybody, so much for your time and for your attention, for some wonderful questions. And I appreciate it very much. I hope you have a wonderful weekend, wonderful morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you happen to be. As usual, I don't know if it's beginning to sound corny or stupid, but I hope you have people around you who love you. I hope you have plenty of food on the table and a warm, safe place to spend the night. I think there are an awful lot of people these days who are facing a lot more insecurity in those regards. And I feel for those people, particularly because of all the changes we've seen in, particularly in the United States, which are not welcome changes. So I really do hope you're doing okay. And thank you so much for your time again and for your support. It means the world to me. And I will see you all around. Bye, everybody.